Dennis Lin Raider, better known by his nickname BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill, was a serial killer who terrorized Wichita, Kansas and its surroundings from 1974 to 1991. His crimes were planned and executed with cold-blooded precision, and he himself enjoyed the power he had over his victims. Raider's first known murder was the brutal elimination of the four-member Otero family. He tied up his victims, tortured them, and eventually murdered them. In the following years, he killed 6 more women. His methods were merciless, and his behavior after the crimes, mocking the police and writing letters to the media, showed his desire for attention and the need to emphasize his superiority. Raider's motive for these crimes was purely sadomasochistic, seeking satisfaction of his pathological needs. The origin of his behavior can be partially explained by his childhood, which was allegedly normal but in which he exhibited disturbing behavior, including torturing animals. Although he managed to evade the police for a long time, Raider was eventually caught in 2005 thanks to evidence obtained from a floppy disk he sent to the police. At the trial, he confessed to 10 murders and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Frederick Bear, coming from a troubled home, likely contributed significantly to his criminal future. Bear's criminal campaign culminated in a small town in Indiana, where he brutally attacked Corey Clark and her 4-year-old daughter. He broke into their home in the evening and slit their throats with a knife. Afterwards, he returned to his construction job as if nothing had happened. His actions were characterized not only by brutal violence, but also by a monstrousness that went beyond ordinary understanding. The assault and murder of Corey Clark and her daughter sparked a massive police search, eventually leading to his arrest. During the trial, indisputable evidence was presented, including DNA and testimonies. The trial was swift and the outcome was clear. Bear was found guilty and sentenced to death. The trial elicited emotions not only from the victim's family but also from the public, horrified by the nature of his crimes. Since his conviction, Bear's case has gone through various phases of appeals and legal processes. Some public interest advocates and death penalty opponents pointed to Bear's traumatic childhood and mental health issues as a factor that should be considered in his sentencing. Despite these arguments, Bear's sentence was not withdrawn and he faced the reality of spending his remaining days on death row, unless his appeals were successful. His story remains a dark reminder of how easy it is to break the human spirit and the danger posed by those who lose their way to empathy and understanding of the value of a human life. John Stevens, a man dubbed by the media as the Indiana Tripler, was the perpetrator of a triple murder that shook a small community in Indiana in 1996. His actions were particularly brutal, leading to extensive media coverage and public outrage. Stevens, originally from a peaceful suburb, seemed an unlikely perpetrator, but evidence revealed a darker side of his personality. His motive was as mysterious as the violent act he committed. Court psychologists and criminologists believed he might have suffered from deep psychological problems, possibly caused by traumatic events in his past or undiagnosed mental disorders. Stevens' series of crimes began suddenly and without warning. The victims were chosen randomly, increasing public concern and police frustration, who were diligently looking for connections that could help them track down the killer. Eventually, Stevens was caught thanks to forensic evidence and detailed profiling, a relatively new method of investigation at that time. His trial was swift and intense, with Stevens ultimately being found guilty and sentenced to death. The death penalty in Indiana at the time, and even now, is a matter that evokes strong emotions and controversy, and Stevens' case was often cited by both his proponents and opponents. Additionally, Stevens' case was complicated by questions regarding his mental health and the fairness of the death penalty for individuals with mental disorders. After his conviction, Stevens spent several years in prison, during which he made several unsuccessful appeals. His lawyers argued that Stevens shouldn't have been sentenced to death due to his mental condition, while the prosecutors insisted that the nature of his crimes demanded a stricter punishment. Ultimately, Stevens' sentence was carried out, sparking further discussion about the ethics of the death penalty and how society deals with mentally ill criminal offenders. Donald Anthony Grant was a hotel employee in Oklahoma where he committed a double murder in 2001. His crimes resulted from a theft that quickly turned into a violent act. Grant allegedly wanted money to leave the state and therefore decided to rob the hotel. When he encountered two employees, Brenda McAlley and Suzette Smith, during the theft, their meeting ended tragically. Grant shot both of them and then attempted to cover up his crimes by setting the crime scene on fire. This barbaric act reflected the brutal and premeditated nature of his criminal intentions. After the crime, he managed to escape but was soon caught, arrested, and brought to trial. During the trial, details of Grant's crime were revealed, as well as some aspects of his background that could have influenced his behavior. It was stated that Grant had a turbulent childhood and suffered from mental problems. However, the jury did not find these factors convincing enough to justify his actions, and he was found guilty. In 2005, Donald Grant was sentenced to death, and although he spent many years in appeal, where his lawyers argued against the use of death as a punishment, his appeal was ultimately denied. His case was reviewed again concerning possible mental disorders, but despite various aspects and complications associated with his mental state, his death sentence was confirmed. Bobby Joe Long, also known as the Tampa Bay Strangler, was an American serial killer who terrorized the Tampa, Florida area in the 1980s. His crimes were characterized by kidnapping, sexual violence, and the murder of young women. Long's pattern of behavior was particularly violent, and his crimes were known for their brutal execution. Born in 1953 in West Virginia, Long grew up in an environment marked by conflicts and his parents' divorce. He also had a genetic anomaly causing the development of extra breast tissue, which was a source of mockery during his adolescence and may have contributed to his later hatred of women. His serial murders began in 1984 when Long started attacking women in Tampa. His plan involved picking up victims, often sex workers or women in distress, in his car, followed by their sexual assault and murder. Long confessed to approximately 50 kidnappings and sexual assaults, although the number of his victims is likely higher. The Bobby Joe Long murders led to a large-scale police investigation. In 1984, he was finally caught, partly thanks to the courage of one of his victims, Lisa McVeigh, who managed to escape and provided crucial information to the police. In 1985, Long was found guilty and sentenced to death. After nearly 35 years of appeals, Long was executed by lethal injection in 2019. His story and crimes remain a dark chapter in Florida's history. Long's case also significantly contributed to the development of investigation techniques, such as DNA use and profiling of serial killers, tools that today allow for more effective identification and apprehension of criminals. Randy Stephen Kraft, sometimes nicknamed the Scorecard Killer, is an American serial killer convicted of the murder of 16 young men between 1972 and 1983, though he is suspected to have over 50 victims. Kraft's crimes were particularly abhorrent due to his methods of torture, abuse, and killing methods. Many of his victims were found with high alcohol levels and traces of sedatives or other drugs. Born in 1945 and raised in California, he appeared outwardly intelligent and well-adapted. He served in the Air Force and then earned a degree in economics. However, his private life was much darker, characterized by a tendency towards violent behavior and sexual aggression. His crimes were typically well-planned, and he hunted his victims in gay bars, beaches, and highways in Southern California, many of whom were soldiers or young hitchhikers. After attacking and subsequently murdering his victims, he often left their bodies in remote areas along the Pacific Coast highways. His arrest came in May 1983 when he was stopped by police for driving under the influence, during which a dead young man's body was found in his vehicle. Evidence found in his vehicle linked him to many other murders, including the infamous scorecard, a document where he noted his murders in a coded form. Kraft was eventually sentenced in 1989, and based on evidence, including photographs of victims, forensic evidence, and his personal records, he was given the death penalty. Despite his attempts at appeals over the years, his sentence was repeatedly upheld, and Kraft remains on death row in San Quintino to this day. His case is considered one of the worst in California history, and Kraft's ability to evade legal punishment for so long further underscores the challenges associated with investigating serial killers. Rodney Alcala, known as the dating game killer due to his brief appearance on a television dating game in 1978, was an American serial killer responsible for the murder of up to 130 girls and women in the 1970s and 1980s. Alcala was notorious for his terrifying cat-and-mouse game with his victims, often photographing them and torturing them before killing them. Born in 1943 in Texas, his family moved to Los Angeles when he was young. In 1961, he joined the army but was soon discharged due to a nervous breakdown. After returning to civilian life, he studied at the UCLA School of Fine Arts, seemingly having a promising future ahead. However, behind this charming and intelligent facade, he hid dark secrets. Alcala began his murderous campaign in the late 1960s, and his first known crime was an attempted murder of an 8-year-old girl. He was quickly arrested and convicted, but was released due to technical errors. After his release, he continued his murders, often luring victims under the guise of being a photographer. Over the years, he murdered several women and girls whom he raped, beat, and strangled. Alcala's arrest in 1979 for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Samso led to a series of trials during which Alcala was repeatedly sentenced to death. Although some verdicts were overturned on technicalities, he was again found guilty of 5 murders in 2010 and sentenced to death. The evidence against him was compelling, including DNA, forensic evidence, and dental matches with bites on the victims. Thanks to advancements in DNA testing, Alcala was eventually linked to many more murders across the United States. It is believed that the number of his victims may be much higher than he could admit. Alcala died of natural causes in 2021 at the age of 77 while waiting for his death sentence, meaning many of his crimes remain unpunished. Charles Ng, a name associated with unimaginable brutality and terror that reigned over Northern California in the mid-20th century, remains one of the worst criminals in history. Ng, now a 61-year-old man, was convicted in 1999 for the murders of 11 people, 6 men, 3 women, and 2 babies between 1984 and 1985. In 1984, Ng carried out a series of kidnappings across Northern California, where victims were hidden in a secret bunker on a remote fenced property in the Sierra Nevada, 240 kilometers east of San Francisco. Following the discovery of the victim's location, his accomplice committed suicide, and Ng managed to escape to Canada. However, he was eventually arrested there for shoplifting and assaulting a security guard. The extradition process was lengthy, as Ng's lawyer argued against his extradition to a jurisdiction that imposed the death penalty while Canada did not. After a 6-year battle, Ng returned to U.S. soil in 1991. The subsequent trial in California, which began in 1998, is considered one of the longest and the most expensive in state history, marked by repeated delays and motions by Ng and his defense team. During the trial, the prosecution presented disturbing evidence, including a 250-page diary and videotapes documenting his horrifying murders. The California Supreme Court finally managed to impose the death penalty in 2022, but it will be many more years before it is actually carried out. Ricky William Parish was charged and subsequently convicted of 3 cases of kidnappings and 1 case of armed robbery, which occurred in January 1974. His crimes were particularly violent and included the kidnapping of Cheryl Pauline Simon and 2 children while they were left in a car in front of a store. During the 4-hour captivity, Simon was raped several times and forced to perform oral sex, as was her niece Tammy Quist. The court case was kind of complicated. The defense challenged the competence of the 12-year-old witness Tammy Quist, who had learning difficulties due to poor eyesight, and her mental age was estimated at 5 years. However, the court decided that Tammy was capable of testifying because she understood the difference between truth and lies, and she was not diagnosed as mentally retarded. As for the accused Parish, his own testimony was questioned during crossover examination, when it was found that his claims that the sexual activities were consensual and that they had a long-term relationship with the victims were in direct contradiction to the victim's testimony. Moreover, a weapon similar to the one used on the night of the crime was found, and a magazine from the gun was found in the victim's car. Parish was sentenced to life imprisonment for each kidnapping and 10 years for armed robbery, with the robbery sentence to follow the kidnapping sentences. Although Parish attempted to appeal, arguments regarding false testimony and improper conduct by the prosecutor were dismissed, and his appeal was found to be without merit, thus confirming his original conviction. The entire case not only revealed the horrendous nature of Parish's crimes, but also the complexity of legal procedures dealing with witness competency, legal ethics, and justice. John William King, a name forever linked with one of the most heinous crimes in American history. In 1999, along with accomplices Lawrence Brewer and Sean Berry, King committed a crime so vile it shocked the nation and exposed the deeply rooted racism still plaguing society. This crime was the brutal murder of James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old African-American man who was chained to the back of a pickup truck, dragged for miles along a secluded road, and gruesomely mutilated near a church. King, then 45-year-old, was the last of the 3 perpetrators to face the ultimate punishment for his role in Byrd's murder. His past revealed even darker circumstances. King was a member of a white supremacist prison gang and had racist symbols tattooed on his body, including those associated with the Ku Klux Klan, swastikas, and even a depiction of a lynching. In a final attempt before his execution, King's lawyer sought a retrial based on a recent Supreme Court ruling, arguing his original lawyers failed to adequately represent his claims of innocence, despite King's insistence on them. This appeal was denied by a 5-4 vote in the Texas Appeals Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court decided against halting his execution just 30 minutes before it was scheduled. During the execution, King had no personal witnesses and spoke no last words, but provided a written statement beforehand. He was administered a lethal dose of pentobarbital at 6:56 p.m. and pronounced dead 12 minutes later. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you like this video and want to see more, then please subscribe, like, and comment what do you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video. Not video.